Adam Smith and his Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations presents a political theory of a commercial society in which individual economic freedom, guided by competition and the rule of law, can actually generate national prosperity while still requiring an active but limited state. His ideas develop within the Scottish Enlightenment and against mercantilist policies, and they center on the division of labor, the principle of invisible hands, and a government tasked with justice, defense, and public works. Historical and political context. Smith wrote an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations in 1776, at the height of European mercantilism, where states sought power by hoarding gold, promoting exports, and restricting imports through tariffs and monopolies. He argued that these policies confused money with real wealth and led to trade wars, colonial exploitation, and special privileges for merchants at the expense of the public. He belonged to the Scottish Enlightenment, a milieu that emphasized reason, scientific inquiry, and improvement, and that produced figures like David Hume and many other moral and political philosophers. Smith also engaged with French physiocrats who criticized the ancient regime and advocated laissez-faire, helping shape his opposition to state-directed trade and his belief that economic systems should be understood through systematic theory. Adam Smith was born in Kirkcaldy, 5th in 1723. He studied at Glasgow and Oxford, and later became a professor at the University of Glasgow, where he lectured on moral philosophy, jurisprudence, and political economy. His early career in Edinburgh and Glasgow brought him into close friendship with David Hume and other Enlightenment thinkers, embedding him in ongoing debates about morality, religion, and yes, politics. In 1759, he published The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which developed a psychology of sympathy and a virtue ethical framework that underpins his later economic work. After tutoring a young aristocrat on a grand tour in France, where he met physiocrats like Quesnay and intellectuals like Voltaire, he returned to Scotland and spent nearly a decade writing The Wealth of Nations, which was published in 1776. Widely regarded as the first comprehensive and systematic way of doing political economy. Later, Smith was appointed Commissioner of Customs in Scotland by the year 1777 and Rector of the University of Glasgow in 1787. Positions that show he was not hostile to government in principle, but concerned with its proper functions in a commercial society. So what are the core aims of the Wealth of Nations? Smith's central question is why some nations become rich while others they do remain poor, leading him to analyze how labor, capital, and institutions interact to generate the wealth of nations. He rejects the mercantilist focus on bullion and trade surpluses, insisting that real wealth consists of the annual produce of land and labor, what a nation actually makes and consumes. Politically, he seeks to replace a system of privilege and state-managed trade with a system of natural liberty, in which individuals are generally free to pursue their own economic projects, subject to laws that protect property and enforce contracts. In this sense, wealth is much a theory of a free but regulated commercial order, as it is a technical economic treatise. One of Smith's most famous ideas is that the division of labor, breaking production into many small specialized tasks, dramatically increases productivity. His example of a pin factory shows that 10 workers, each performing a distinct task, can produce thousands of pins per day. Whereas, working individually on all tasks, they could produce only a few within a day. Politically, the division of labor underpins his vision of a commercial society where ordinary people's living standards rise because specialized market-driven production makes goods cheaper and more plentiful. At the same time, he warns that excessive specialization can dull workers' minds, which justifies public education as a political and more necessity to sustain a free citizenry. Smith famously argues that individuals seeking their own advantage within competitive markets can unintentionally promote the common good, a process he metaphorically describes as being led by an invisible hand. In wealth, the key passage concerns merchants who prefer investing in domestic industry for their own security. In doing so, they increase domestic employment and output, thus benefiting society without intending to. The invisible hand is not a mystical force, but a way of describing how self-interest, constrained by competition, property rights, and the rule of law, can coordinate dispersed information and resources better than any centralized state directive. For example, this is his own example, by the way. A baker, brewer, and butcher supply food, not because they love the public, but because they seek profit. Yet, in a well-functioning market, their pursuit of gain leads to affordable bread, good meat for all consumers. Crucially, Smith does not claim that self-interest always yields public benefit. He notes many cases where private interests, especially those of merchants seeking monopolies or protection, run directly against the public interest. Hence, the invisible hand, operates only under particular institutional conditions, and it never removes the need for law, morality, and political oversight. Smith describes a system of natural liberty in which individuals are free to choose their occupations, trade with whom they wish, and invest where returns are highest, provided they obey general laws of justice. He argues that restrictions such as guild privileges, exclusive charters, and trade monopolies, they do distort prices, misallocate capital, and enrich narrow interest at the public's expense. His critique of mercantilism is therefore deeply political. It is a critique of a state captured by merchants and manufacturers who persuade governments to impose tariffs, navigation acts, and colonial policies that benefit them but impoverish consumers and provoke international conflict. For instance, Smith holds that colonial monopolies and navigation laws allowed British merchants to overcharge colonial markets and underpay colonial producers, creating resentment and dependency rather than mutual benefit. Smith's political theory in The Wealth of Nations cannot be separated from his earlier moral philosophy in The Theory of Moral Sentiments, where he emphasizes sympathy, impartial spectatorship, and virtues like justice, prudence, and beneficence. He insists that markets presuppose a moral and legal order. Without general rules of justice that protect persons and property, commerce cannot flourish and society collapses into insecurity. Thus, while economic actors are driven mainly by self-interest, political and legal institutions must enforce basic justice and prevent fraud, force, and breach of contract. Smith treats justice as a negative virtue. Its violation must be punished, whereas beneficence, like charity or generosity for instance, they cannot be coerced, underscoring his liberal distinction between what government must enforce and what it should leave to individual conscience. Contrary to the caricature of Smith as a pure laissez-faire ideologue, he assigns government three essential duties, and these are very important. Take note of this: national defense, the administration of justice, and the provision of certain public works and institutions that the market will not supply adequately. Defense is necessary to protect society from external aggression. Justice secures property and contract, protects them. Public works include roads, bridges, harbors, and basic education, which raise productivity but are not profitable enough for private investors alone. So the state must provide all these things. Smith also acknowledges that government may regulate in cases of clear market failure. For example, setting standards for weights and measures, regulating banking to prevent system risk, and sometimes using taxes and bounties where these clearly correct distortions rather than create them. At the same time, he warns that officials are no less self-interested than merchants. So political power must be limited by clear laws and vigilance against capture by those who live by profit. A concrete example is his support for user fees like tolls. He thinks these can align incentives by making those who benefit help pay for their maintenance. But he also sees cases where the state must finance infrastructure outright in poor or sparsely populated regions. Similarly, he supports widespread, partly public, elementary schools to counteract the intellectual narrowing produced by the division of labor, viewing it as a vital to civic competence and social stability. Smith's vision of a commercial society links economic liberty with a broader liberal political order. He suggests that widely diffused prosperity creates more independent citizens, less dependent on feudal lords or arbitrary rulers. Yet, he is acutely aware of the dangers of concentrated economic power, criticizing monopolies, corporations with special privileges, and collusion among merchants who seldom get together without conspiring against the public. Over time, The Wealth of Nations became the foundational text of classical economics and was taken as a charter for free trade and anti-mercantilist policies in the 19th century. Modern scholarship, however, emphasizes that Smith's political theory is more nuanced than a simple defense of unregulated markets. It is a theory of how legal, moral, and limited governmental frameworks can harness self-interest and the division of labor to promote both prosperity and a stable, just political order.